Book discussion, Paul Feyerabend Against Method, Chapter 5. This is a really important chapter. It inspired me because it made me think about something I never thought about this way before. And this is a nice example of how just reading and thinking is conditioning of the mind. It just helps you rethink things, come up with new things. It's really like it's exactly like training martial arts where you're doing you're doing push-ups, you're doing footwork, you're doing conditioning, you're doing pull-ups, whatever you're doing, and then all of a sudden you have a better punch, or your kimura is better, or things, just the techniques, the actual purpose of what you're doing gets better. And this is exactly why reading is so important. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important reading is for a hedge fund manager. It is not just some pastime intellectual endeavor. It is the business of a hedge fund manager to continuously read. And even Warren Buffett said that. I think one of the first hedge fund managers actually that made it big, Warren Buffett, he said the same thing. So this is not just coming from me. I want to discuss chapter 5 because I have I have seen a really interesting combination between what Feyerabend is talking about and what I've been hearing from people like David Deutsch and Popper has been writing. And the question is, okay, we have data. Data is inconsistent with theories. Why is that happening all the time? This is what I want to discuss. And the conclusion, the inspiration is that theories are really like little organisms. The analogy is the little organism that X out the niche in the ecosystem works really well in the niche, but it doesn't work for the whole world. A fish is very good in water. It doesn't necessarily, you can't live on terrestrial uh, circumstances. So you can't say the fish is wrong because if I test them against terrestrial circumstances, the fish doesn't work anymore. The fish works really well in its own ecosystem. This is how theories are. This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 27th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're down 4.8%. The market's up 2.3. For the year, we are up 38.4. The market is up 20.6. We're outperforming by 17.8%. So let me ask the following question. What is the provenance of theories? How do theories come along? Why do theories even happen? And there's a big conversation in epistemology. Feyerabend talks about it, everybody talks about it, which is okay, we observe stuff, we come up with theories, but we can't really trust our own observations, really. Technically, our observations are theory a lot in themselves. So, what's going on here? And I think I like this analogy that Deutsch uses, and it is definitely a further examination of Popper's writings, and that is that we should think of theories like abstract little organisms that create themselves the same way organisms in the ecosystem through a Darwinian process of natural selection just get out certain livings in certain niches by developing a certain amount of knowledge, genetic knowledge, and then are able to survive in that niche. And this is exactly how a theory works. A theory comes out because there is a problem or there is something that happens that allows it to evolve. So if we have um, let's take the theory of wealth creation, which is what we think about a lot here at Orange Capital Partners. Theory of wealth creation, of course, started way back when wealth started being created. It started, at least in modern times, I would say, started with the Florentine bankers, the Medicis of this world, and the Venetian bankers, because they were the first to really start creating wealth. Before that, I would say wealth was created by basically fighting wars, stealing land from each other, and then growing stuff on that land and enslaving people to work on the land. That was kind of how wealth was created. And that's how feudalism and aristocracy evolved in Europe. The wealth creation that we talk about, which is sort of technological innovation, or let's call it innovation that goes that comes from ideas and knowledge. That kind of innovation that then drives wealth required new theories. And at least in modern times, I don't want to go too deep here, but let's take the theory of Warren Buffett, which is value investing, more or less. Let's take that as a theory. That was a very good theory which evolved in the sort of 1930s to 1950s. And I think in hindsight, we can, of course, rationalize why it happened. And let's just say it happened because in those times, it was incredibly important for companies to have assets. And the theory of value investing is kind of like a return on asset type theory. So you have a certain amount of assets, and then what is the return you can generate from those assets? And the higher that return is, the better the business. This is, in a nutshell, saw how Buffett saw the world, and that was his theory. And I think, particularly in the early innings of that theory, it was a very powerful theory because you could look at businesses, you could say, okay, this is the amount of assets, and then there's the return. But it also, because once you have that theory, and the business also, which is owned by Buffett, starts generating more assets, starts focusing, maximizing the evolution of assets, developing more assets, making sure those assets are the types of assets that generate higher returns. So you all of a sudden you have a much better purpose. You know what you should be doing. Now, that theory worked for a while, and now today it's not working anymore. So today we have the necessity to evolve a new theory, and this is exactly, we're in the process actually at Orange Capital Partners to do this. I'm writing my memoirs where I'm trying to put certain ideas in, but in general, we're struggling with this. We don't have a theory of wealth generation sort of in the 21st century. But certainly the value investing theory doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't work. And I believe the reason it doesn't work is because we have exponential growth. We have the phenomenon of exponential growth, which has been around for a few decades, but now it's clearly kicking in. Companies like NVIDIA, to some extent Amazon, Microsoft, and definitely Tesla, and other companies that we don't even know about today, they have the ability to generate exponential growth. So what do? We have to echo out a new theory. A theory has to, we need to find this abstract organism that can fill this niche of the times when exponential growth started, and how do we generate wealth in exponential growth. We have certain aspects that I think help us understand what drives exponential growth. For example, we spoke about the cost of iteration. The lower the cost of iteration, the higher the disruptive force. So this is part of it. But let's go back and ask ourselves, so why do we have exponential growth now? Why didn't we have exponential growth during the times of Warren Buffett? And I think the reason we have exponential growth is because we can iterate much faster at lower cost, in particular in physical goods. This is the absolute new thing, because we had exponential growth before, like I said, a few decades actually, because we had it in Silicon Valley in the software business. Software is the type of business where iteration is cheap. You can just write code and rewrite code and all that. And to some extent, maybe you making mistakes, like let's say Facebook making a mistake with 2 billion users. Yeah, it can be costly, but it's still a lot cheaper than building a Golden Gate Bridge 50 times and trying to figure out, which one works. You can't do it. You can only build one Golden Gate Bridge in reality and figure it out. And it takes a long time. It's very difficult to do. So iteration around physical goods has been very expensive, and with the advent of machine learning and general applications of AI also, I think what we believe at Orange Capital Partners, self-supervised reinforcement learning, which is sort of still in the application phase, or early application phase, excuse me, will drive this whole idea of exponential growth to a much to the next level. So with exponential growth, we need new theories, because assets, in a world of exponential growth, assets are almost irrelevant. And it is actually the rate at exponential growth, the rate of innovation, that drives growth and returns. So we need to find a way to reconcile disruptive force, which is driven by lower cost of iteration, lower cost of iteration drives innovation, drives growth, drives returns. So what is the return on ideas? What is the return on iteration? Those are the kinds of concepts we're working on. Again, we don't have a theory, particularly not a formal or anything like that, so we can't just deliver that here. But we have certain, I think, good ideas of how to formulate a theory of wealth generation in the area of exponential growth. This is I think a nice example to answer the question, how do theories actually evolve? What's the provenance of theories? Well, the provenance of theories is new stuff happens. And we observe new stuff. And more importantly, it's not just the observation, because I do agree with people like Deutsch and Popper and Feyerabend that observations are theory a lot. And so we can't just trust our observations and say they are objective. Observations are driven by theories. For example, the concept of an asset has to be evolved through the theory of value investing. So value investing defines what an asset is. The asset defines what value investing is. There's a circle of reference. We have the same problem in the theory of exponential growth. And I think I'm a very sort of Jordan Peterson type person when it comes to all these types of things. I always ask myself, is it good enough? It doesn't have to be true. Truth is a very relative concept, and I'm absolutely not a relativist when it comes to epistemology and philosophy. But truth is, there's no such thing as truth that I know of, but I know what's good enough, what works good enough for me. And for example, what works good enough for me is value investing in the 50s works good enough. I don't care if I have circle references with what are assets. It just worked really good enough until it didn't. Until exponential growth came along and value investing then just didn't work anymore. So the niche that value investing carved out for itself, it was kind of like the fish, which worked really well in water, but now we have terrestrial animals and the fish can't work anymore. We need new theories. We need a new niche. We need a new theory, new knowledge that can help us explain how we can solve the particular problem, which is wealth generation in the era of exponential growth. So to summarize, chapter 5 of Feyerabend talks about basically talks about the problem that a lot of theories don't match with facts. And it made me think, and this was the inspiration that I got in this chapter, that listen, why do we even look at it that way? It's not the theory's fault that new facts come along. In fact, the facts that we observe might even be only observable because we have the theory. And the theory might not work with those facts because this particular theory we're talking about, and I use the example of value investing. Value investing is a great theory. It works in its own niche. Like I tried to explain in the 30s to 50s when this theory came along with Paul Graham and then Warren Buffett, that was the name of the game, was build assets and then generate returns on assets. So businesses that have a lot, the more assets you have and the higher the return on asset is, the better. Of course, over time, this is just me sort of in brackets. What happened is Buffett realized, well, I can't really generate higher returns on my assets, so let's just reduce my assets and keep the earnings stable, and then I have much higher returns on assets also. So basically reduce the denominator. And that turns out to be very bad for growth and things like that. So brackets closed. Let's come to the point here of this particular episode of the podcast series, which is I'm trying to say here is that we have a new theory of wealth generation in the area of exponential growth. And the reason we have that is because we have exponential growth. So driven by technological innovation, driven by AI, and the ability to iterate on physical goods much faster than before, we have now the potential for exponential growth. And exponential growth throws back a problem to us, which is how can we generate wealth? Value investing doesn't work. We need something else. And what we have is this theory of disruption. Disruption is driven by the lower cost of iteration, and iteration is driven by things like AI and other technological innovations. Basically, how fast can we solve problems and error correct and at a lower cost? Speed and cost. Faster speed, lower cost of error correction. This drives exponential growth, and within that context, we can then allocate money to businesses that have that ability, such as Tesla. Thank you.